this 77th session of Art Matters, a series the Raza Foundation has been running. We have completed 10 years already in collaboration with the India International Center. This session is devoted to discuss, do art books matter? There has been a slow growth or progress, if you like, in the publication of art books. However, recently, many important art books have appeared. And one of the journals devoted to art, called Take On by her, has published a special issue which provides the initial provocation for such a discussion. Do art books matter? I have received 2 art books. If by mistake they fell on my head, it will immediately break down in my head. And they're so big and heavy. There are art books which are published in the format of a catalog for a show. They are also art books.
That's the one that's going to break the head. The Tantra one.
Yeah. And there are, of course, art historical books and art critical books, etc. Many of these books, sometimes one may feel, while they are written critically, that is by art critics or art historians, but they lack that aspect of criticality because they are funded by galleries. So there is an element where perhaps if you're writing about an artist and if the gallery is publishing, you are unlikely to say something negative or
we had a session on that. Wonderful session.
Anyway, I mean, these are issues which are there. But who reads art books? I mean, of course, the artists read them perhaps, although the artists cannot be accused of being very well read. No? They are very creative people, but not necessarily well read. Please. I mean, unless
They're learning.
Yeah. So perhaps the artists read it, the other art critics read it. The general person, a general reader of books, perhaps does not read or does not have such an easy access to the art books. For 2 reasons. One, they are not generally available in the bookstores. And secondly, they are very heavily priced. So they are difficult to... But the fact remains that they are an important set of records. They record what is happening, they analyze what is happening, and they have historical importance and value. I am just putting together some of the material on Raza, and it was very important to find this photograph, that photograph, who's the person, who was at what time, etc. So they are important documents which have a value in terms of preservation of memory, preservation of trends which might fade out, preservation of memory of artists who at one time mattered and may not have survived in contemporary geography of relevance and significance, etc. So they are important. So in any case, that's the question. Now, we have, how many? 5 eminent speakers, some of them gray-haired, some of them mixed, some of them frightfully young. Now, we have Dayanita Singh, who is a very well-known, eminent artist. but has also done a lot of works around books. Many of her photographs and things have been about books. Then we have Pramod KG, who I first met when he was looking after the Jaipur Literature Festival. For a while, then I don't know what happened to him.
He went to Bhutan.
He went to all over the place and then disappeared, so he is there. And we have my old friend Malvika Singh, who at one time used to edit, what was it called?
The India magazine.
India magazine, to which I wrote a piece on Swaminathan once. And she looks after Seminar, which is a very seminal and an important journal of ideas. Then we have Mr. Akshay Pathak, who heads the Indian branch, or whatever it's called, of health.
Pro-Helvetious Research Council.
Yeah. And we have the irrepressible, you know what? So Bhavna Kakar, who put it all together for us. Pramod will conduct it, and the others will speak, and I'll shut up now. And if there is time, the rule of the game should be that since we have as many as 5 speakers, say about 10 minutes each, and then if they want to discuss between themselves, they can do that. Otherwise, open it to the house if there are questions or comments. The questions have to be brief, sharp, if possible witty. Don't make too many theoretical or such like, you know.
No.
Yeah. So, and think about the question. One person will get one question, no more. And you can coin it in a manner that there are 3 questions in one. And if you don't have these skills, well, you are not worthy of being here. But anyway, this is a sabha of Sahidaya. And when I say this, I don't mean any offense. I may remind you that Bharat Muni in Natya Shastra prescribed 36 qualities in a Sahidaya. The listener, the viewer, 36 qualities. I am asking only for 3. That you are intelligent, that you are sensitive, and that you have a capacity to listen. Thank you very much, and Pramod. Take over.
Evening, everybody.
I think it's done.
Okay, fine.
So, we're looking at take books, which is an issue that sort of prompted this conversation to be initiated. Just to give you a brief round as what the magazine issue is all about, not because I want to push the magazine just because I edited it, guest edited it for this issue, but because it sort of brilliantly sums up the way I perceive art books and what art books need to be about. It's a universal view that everybody enjoys art books. Some people say they don't, but I do know that secretly most of them do enjoy them in some form or the other. But the problem is everything that is put out in the market as an art book may not necessarily be an art book. There are degrees and variations, and each person is likely to have his or her bias when they look and create something of this format. We commissioned about 10 different writers to speak about 10 different books, and some smaller books were also subsequently added because post-2000 these were the 25 odd books that I thought were pertinent enough to be discussed. And again, it's my own filter, my own bias. So I'm sure there are other extraordinary books that would have been done elsewhere but don't necessarily form part of the list. This means no disrespect to any of them. It's just that this was my outlook, this was my filter, this was my context of looking at it. I had another problem is many of the people in the art world are close friends of mine, so I was also trying not to include their books particularly in it. So I've taken care of Dayanita there. And the other thing was that what is it that they particularly bring to the fore? What is it that these books really bring out that is extraordinary about it? So we've got architecture, but we're not looking at fixed architecture, but we're looking at the book guest edited by Rahul Mehrotra and one of his colleagues on the Kumbh Mela and the architecture of the Kumbh. So you're talking about ephemerality, but you're also speaking about architecture at the same time. We have a textile catalog of a museum collection being spoken about, not because a museum collection books are not frequently mentioned, but this was particular for the City Palace in Jaipur, which over the years, much before the museum was organized, lost a lot of their textiles, and these have now become part of important collections across the world. So this catalog actually comprises not just what's within the museum now, but exists of this collection elsewhere in the world. So it is a very novel, interesting way of considering this problem. Some of the other books that we spoke about was what is the kind of design articulation that a book brings out for you. There was a remarkable book on Kashmir, on the work of 9 different photography journalists in Kashmir by the name of Witness, which is one of the most extraordinary books in the art world that I saw in the last few years. And it was very important for me to try and get that to be spoken about. We are also trying to push in the idea of books that exist but are not necessarily well known within the corpus of what is considered art books. While at some level I did stay away from exhibition catalogs, one of my prerequisites was that since so many exhibition catalogs are being brought out, you generally see a group of artworks together and you see them in a forced context of what they are. But how many books are being written, brought out on art movements, on looking at collections which are not necessarily connected to one another, but are connected to traditions or are stylistically related to something else? What kind of books are being created? And there was a brilliant book done by an American scholar on traditional Indian paintings where they talk about what is the intelligence of tradition within the local miniature artist. Now that was a path-breaking book which looked and explored paintings from a completely different filter. So these were the kinds of narrative stories that one was keen to try and explore and bring out, so that the audience who picks up, say, an issue of Take realizes that beyond what you always see, there is a huge gamut of material that's brought out. One lacune that I particularly lacked here is that I'm not well versed with the vernacular traditions to have picked up books that were probably done in Bengali or Marathi or in Malayalam or in Dogra or Dogri or in any of the other languages. So our filter was usually through English because that was what I was comfortable with, that was what I was aware of, and that was what the reviewers who were contributing were looking at. Amongst this mix of books that were being brought in, one unique take that really was interesting for me is that whenever I looked at the scholarship on Punjab and its arts and architecture, I realized that a few books were coming out, but invariably they were being written by one gentleman. And I said, Subhash Parihar, this extraordinary man, I've never met him. He probably lives somewhere in Punjab. He teaches in a local university. But the most remarkable books on Punjab's built heritage, historic heritage, on its gardens, on its architecture, are all done by one single man, produced by a slightly lesser known publishing house. But then we said, instead of books, let's do a piece on him, on exploring how does one person look at and negotiate the art of his region. So these were the various filters that we were looking at. And I'm going to now try and get my co-panelists to speak on how do they look at art books? Do they see it in the same filter as I do? How about an artist? When an artist creates artworks, but then they also realize that they want to be able to make books that speak of their work in a particular way, creating a particular narrative, how does that work? And to sort of start off on that tempo, I'm going to invite my colleague, friend Dayanita, to speak and give us a sense of how she thinks art books are being created, produced, brought out in the market, and her own work as an artist, as an offset printer bringing out books, which is very important.
Thank you, Pramod. I was surprised to be invited to this because I thought, what an odd thing to say. Do art books matter? As long as art matters, books will matter, so what is there to discuss? But I think, if you will indulge me, I have a few technicalities to present to you as a bookmaker. I think the problem with many of the art books that I get unsolicited is that they are indeed very heavy, they take up a lot of space on the bookshelf. Many of them don't fit in the bookshelf, and the cost is very high. We have a fantastic photography book brought out by KNMA, which is maybe for the first time it's going to be a compilation of so much critical writing on photography. The book is 8,000 rupees. So I'm not sure who that book is intended for. So we have the cost, we have the weight, and we have the size. The weight is also to do with catalogs that are being produced by in a digital format, where the cheapest paper is used, which makes it maybe 3 times heavier than an offset printed book. So that becomes a problem when you're traveling, and many people travel now. So museums are finding it very difficult to sell their catalogs more than 200, 300 copies. But as you will know, for offset to make sense, you need to print at least 300, 500 copies. So that is something that is falling aside. I think perhaps what needs to change is the form of these books. And my question always to anyone making a book, why is it a printed book? Why does it have to be a printed book? Why can this museum catalog not be an e-book? Why can I not have a different form of understanding or saving or studying this material? Does it really have to be a printed book? And to that, I would like to answer that we see now in India a shift happening from the traditional book format to book objects. And I brought something with me which I think would be lovely to talk about in this situation, because I think the books that will survive, the books that need to be printed, are books that are really like an event, like an experience. You get that book and it allows you to build an exhibition, it allows you to disseminate that work, it allows you to play with the form. So the question to me is not, will art books matter, but in what form do the art books continue? Because of course they matter, as long as art matters, they will matter. But the forms for them need to change. So I just brought one book, two books actually, to show you what I'm talking about. This book, Guftagu, which has just been published by Offset Press, Offset Projects, I think they are here in the audience. It's a book done with 10 contemporary photographers from the region. So you pull it out, there are these 10 zines, and you can choose whether you want to look at Uma Bista's work, Nida's work, Nandita's work. And then you have a poster as well, which you can sort of display somewhere. A note from the curator, Anshika Verma. I would call her more the editor than the curator, but also someone who has conceived of this experience of photography for more than 2 or 3 years, working closely with the photographers, but still trying to find a form that maybe will make people, you know, if we wanted, we could have an exhibition right here while we talk of Arko Datta's work, for example, like a double accordion fold. So I am very concerned that we try to think, designers and the people who make books, think about why is it in this form? And if it's a printed book, what else can it do? What is the experience it can create? And as far as costs are concerned, as a photographer, I would say to you, I would rather give up on quality and have a book for 500 rupees or 900 rupees than to have the finest publication for 5,000 rupees. So I think books will always be a numbers game.
Continuing on the conversation, let's talk to somebody who's been working with books for a while, has been editing and also looking into magazines and journals, and is a publisher. So I'm going to ask Malvika Singh to give her take on books and the kind of journey of books that you've seen over the last 20, 30 years, particularly for art books. And what is it that they represent to you when you're considering, as somebody, I know she's a great collector of books, but to see what is the complete arc of bookmaking, and is that a field that you still see having newer developments, or is it just going in a different way?
So, I'm very old-fashioned. I think books, as they have always been, have a very important place on the bookshelf, in our homes, in our hearts. I think other usage of the image and the written word, and you want to play around with it and create other forms like Guftagu, is fine, because that's part of the growth. It's like cinema and the experimental cinema. It led to a change in traditional cinema, but it was an experiment. I see these, forgive me, as experiments that may work, may not work, may work for one, may not work for the other. The book is there to stay. It has been there and it will continue to be there. How do we make it more accessible? I think when I started the India magazine in, I don't know when, I mean, you know, when, I don't know when, 70 something. There was nobody writing for us ordinary people about art in all its aspects. That means life. Except for economics and politics, art encompasses everything else of life. So we started the India magazine, and I spent 6 months identifying people who just loved what they lived with, what they collected. It could be a matchbox cover. We used to collect matchbox covers. I remember articles being written on that. And then we had to access these celebrity types like Ashok Ji, who wrote on J. Swaminathan. Somebody else wrote on Hussain Saab. We did a piece on Krishan Khanna. Equally, we did what I used to call contemporary expressions, which was folk art. And slowly we found that more and more people were writing, not knowing how to write necessarily, so we cleaned up the copy. But the expertise, the soul of what they wanted to say came through those articles. And that carried on I did it for 10 years, and then Aruna took it over. But to come back to art books, I find contemporary art, let's talk just of contemporary art for a moment. I find when I go to an exhibition now, I have an artist who's done all the work in the hall, who's telling me what that painting means, why that person did that painting. I find this all very intrusive. For me, from my growing up years, I had a personal conversation with what I saw, whether I liked it, I didn't like it. I find these newfangled ways of looking at art, of looking at an art book, very disturbing. And then that's why I feel I'm irrelevant in this conversation here, because I don't understand it at all. I now delve into catalogs and art books to be quiet with that artist or with that artwork or those artworks. And then I decide what I want to go and see. So I'm moving backwards in that sense. I remember artists in my time when you and I were growing up and today. We were able to talk to a Hussain Saab and say, you know, I don't really like your work. But we were always there respecting each other. And I'm going to give you a funny little story. When I got married, he said, why don't you choose a painting? And I said, no, where will I put it? I can't live with your work in my little house. And he laughed. 10 years later, he said to me, silly girl, you should have taken it. You could have sold it and bought a flat in Nizamuddin. And he was right. But in our time, we didn't look at it like that. You know, we either liked or we didn't. We were friends with the artists. I spent a lot of time with all of them, as some people in the audience did as well. And then when Hussain Saab was in Parliament, he sketched, he never spoke. And those 6 years, he did a series of sketches. And I said to him, that's your art that I want. That is Hussain Saab reflecting on India over those 5 years. And I did Sansad Upanishad. I just brought a copy for Bhavna. There's no caption. Hussain Saab's not telling me that this is why I've done this and this was my motivation. It just speaks. You interpret it the way you want. The artist should be confident not to tell me how to look at his art. Those artists were confident. They didn't care whether we liked or not. They just carried on doing it. And that's what I miss in today's world. And I find the art book, therefore, is my solace. I like to read, like we've got Yashodhara sitting in the audience. I read all that she writes because I'm learning, constantly learning. And I love the catalogs, however heavy they might be, because I get vicarious pleasure looking at stuff that I can't afford. Because in our time, we could buy art. Today, I can't afford a photograph. Forget the art. I have to befriend Dayanita so she presents me with one. Right? So basically, I think the world has changed, and I love that change. But the book, and the art book, and the picture book, and the written word will be the core of all human growth, of ideas of innovation, of development, of change, of activism. You cannot go away from it at all. Sorry.
Thank you, Mala. Akshay, I'm going to come to you for two particular filters. So one is, of course, your take on art books, for sure, as what we are all talking about. But also because you had a very long stint in the business. You've looked at books of all kinds over the years. What is it about the economics of art books that makes it not so possible for so much of it to come out? And every time in any of our projects, sometimes I work as a consultant, as an archivist, when we look at different archives, and very frequently when we finish a project, we are like, this lot of material needs to come out as a book. But every time we go to a publisher, they're like, nobody's interested. There'll be 500 people who want it. We don't want to make a book on it. Can you get the funds? And if you can get the funds, then we'll think about it.
So online.
So online is something, of course, that is being experimented, but I'm also conscious of the fact that there are many people who don't necessarily have access to online forums. So while it's well to say that you can have it, I mean, during the 2 years of the pandemic, we saw episodes where you had little children in remote villages in Jharkhand going on top of rocks, trying to get a phone signal so that they could attend their classes. How do I tell them to look at an art book in those times? I just can't. So we need to be conscious about that. So Akshay, what's your take on the business of creating books?
Thanks. I don't think the art books are anyways reaching that kid, so let's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think let's not bring that kid in.
but there's a way it can go there.
But there are different kinds of books reaching them.
Yeah, but I think let's not bring that kid
Sure,
here.
sure.
It'll be a little strange. I could answer it in a slightly roundabout way.
That's fine, go ahead.
Because I worked for the Frankfurt Book Fair, so perhaps that's why the economics of it came. I've never sold books myself, so I couldn't quite answer it as a publisher. But I mean, they could also hear I have such amazing things to say, I'm sure. Do art, that's a good start, you're laughing. Do art books matter? The idea of books, I mean, I've jotted this down yesterday, so I'm going to kind of read a little bit. I'll be incoherent, so sorry for that. But be patient, it'll make sense, I think, at some point. The idea of books, an object that I have fetishized all my life, it has given me pleasure, pain, and a better understanding of the human mind, society than anything else I can evidence. This idea of books, as I read them more and more and started writing and producing them and working with them, it led to questioning the idea of knowledge and its production. I work in the arts and I have worked in publishing. I work in the art world. There was a meme circulating, what is the art world? I think perhaps one should interrogate that. It comes up a lot. What is this beast? What is this stratosphere? I will add a third reason why I'm here is that I love books. I'm kind of focusing on the books aspect of it. As for art, I sit uncomfortably with the definitions we've reached so far. I don't think anybody can give me an answer of what is art. Everybody fundamentally speaks of it, but cannot define it. And perhaps just as well, I love it for that. And the question posed to us, I presume, is rhetorical. I mean, why art books matter or any books matter? I mean, it's an obvious affirmative. But are we talking about books on art? I think Pramod tackles it in the introduction in the book. It's like, as a gay man, I've always vehemently opposed a gay book. I mean, you don't have gay samosas, you don't have gay, I don't know, what gay books? So I would sort of presume it's books on art that are being talked about. But I'd like to do a slightly different exercise. Another thing I was fond of as a kid who loved books was that I loved puzzles, unjumbling things, anagrams. If some of you might know, I go by the name Yaksha, which is an anagram. My name also a spirit animal. So I kind of break the question a little bit. Does art matter? I mean, you said it matters. I haven't resolved it, what art is, so I'm not sure.
Life.
Sure.
So does life matter?
I'm
Maybe
not
not.
sure. I mean, the black holes being discovered. Do books matter? Are books not art? And since we live in a very horribly unequal society, which has actually conventionally denied the written word to the large part of its population, I would like to add, to whom do books matter, art books matter, and by whom? I think the question of by whom is quite critical. It could lead to answer to the question that you're saying. I'll try. So let's talk about books, about knowledge production. To ask if books matter is a somewhat silly exercise, as I already said. To whom books matter, by whom? But to understand production of any kind, you have to go back to basic economics. You know, production and consumption have a direct correlation. We talk here about who produces books, who gets to produce books, who consumes them, how are they distributed, and finally, how are they actually produced, like the physical aspect of it. And here I'd like to quote one of the most radical thinkers, according to me, of our times, Kufir Nalgundwar, who founded Roundtable India, which is a Dalit Bahujan-led media, and he also published his book Under the Shared Mirror. He, together with Arun Ramdas, once in a conversation described what it means to edit, produce books. And they said, writers write, editors choose, accept, direct, correct, and copy edit hold sway. It means the writer has to become like the editor, lose his or herself, his or her say, and the editor has to become the Brahmin / the capitalist, and it has to function like a cog that has to keep the mode of production running. It leads to the dissolving of the individual because it's a class. It talks about freedom, it doesn't mean anything. He goes on to say, at Roundtable India, the writers don't need to lose themselves. The editors want a world where there is no capitalism, there is no Brahmin. The editors don't choose, select, they only prove, copy, edit. They rarely reject. It's totally inappropriate to call them editors, actually. They perform only a tiny task in the whole system. One could say they do the same work as the carpenters, darzis, leather workers. So perhaps call them darzis, leather workers, carpenters instead of editors. That's a terminology of a decaying world. This process to me sounded very interesting. Do the art books also reflect that? Is there an entire process to the art? Art as a process of all this that goes into putting this object, this fetishized object. Does it matter? Well, it does. It pays people their bills, whether it's the editor or the carpenter or the printer. But does it reproduce existing forms of social organization, the way society is organized, I mean? And here, I think, the question then about the economics of it comes in, that if the consuming class, which actually is abominably small, you know, when I worked in publishing, I worked for a German organization. It's like one of the best publishing ecosystems in the world. I mean, it's appalling that even now a bestseller in India is ridiculously low. It's 30,000, 40,000 max in a country of a billion. I mean, so the economics of the most popular book is bad. How will you imagine a niche book to fill that gap? Do art books matter? When I worked in publishing, and it was also brought up, you know, there was always this doomsday of the book. I think the book started dying the day it was first conceived, like the story, like the novel. And I actually believe that. I do believe. I don't like an immortality. I don't like any ideas of eternity. They're very supremacist. But I also don't like it because it limits our way of seeing what is a book, what is art, what is an art book. Do books matter? Do art books matter? Does art need more books? Do books need more art? Are books art? Art as books? There are artists doing it, Dayanita is here. I mean, they've already resolved some of these questions. I'd like to just end by one of the questions. We were given a brief. I'm sorry, I didn't stick to the brief. I never do. That we could also pick a book that kind of strikes as something that stands apart as an art book. And I think the book that came to my mind, which is quite fundamental to our existence, and that is the Constitution of India. I cannot imagine a better art book. A book produced by the labor of love, for ideas of justice. Not a perfect document, perhaps, as said by the framer, Dr. Ambedkar himself, and just as well, perfect books lead to rather gory outcomes between imperfect human beings. And a beautiful book, as you all might know. There's enough written by it by art historians. There's like, you know, it was produced over 5 years. I think it was, the original actually took 5 years, and it has the signatures of the framers, of course, and has illustrations of the different civilizations. Again, problematic. It has been misinterpreted into some kind of very limited idea of India, but still, nevertheless, like these prehistoric Mohenjo-daro to the Indus Valley, the calligraphy was done by Bihari Narayan Raizada. This got illuminations by Nandlal Bose and his students. It has, as I said, it has been critiqued also, rightly so. But most importantly, it adorns the hands of the great man himself in the many statues built by, again, a labor of love by artists and artisans. And I think for that very reason, I think art books matter. They matter when you see it in this collective form, a book being held by the man who gave us the idea of equality. And so I would say they don't just matter, they're quite essential. I think I'll end there.
I want to ask a question, if I may.
But I have another speaker. So
Yeah, but does an image matter?
Um,
Image, if the book shouldn't be there, or whatever you said, does image matter? Does capturing images, photography, painting, folk painting on the walls of the house, rangoli on the floor, does that matter, and does that carry a message, an emotion? Does it? Because humans matter as long as we're alive on this planet. So that is an expression of humans, of humanity. Does image matter, since most people can't read or write?
Sure, I think I did address that a little bit to say that I don't like the idea of the book being eternal, simply because it also limits our idea of what constitutes an art book. Does a wall painting constitute a way of reading? Yes. So
Yeah, because in our country we painted the walls of palaces and forts and havelis, and some of us then started painting railway stations. So I am saying, if you want to take art to the people and they can't read or write and go to the art book, maybe artists, photographers, sculptors should put their work in railway stations and let the people of India see the expression of India.
So if you're talking about modes of art dissemination, that's going to be an entirely different conversation. I'm not going to
I
push
just thought
for
I'd
that
say
now.
it and end.
But just to get Bhavna to, no, but just to bring you in, Bhavna, the kernel of this idea, of course, came from you. You came forward, you said you wanted an issue, and then I spoke of books, and you happily agreed onto it. Over the years, with the kinds of issues that you've done on Take, and the fact that there is so much of knowledge production created around the idea of books, particularly that come from the arts, and to refer to some things that Akshay spoke about, in a lot of our work, we also realize that knowledge production happens that doesn't necessarily get recorded in the formats you and I consider as recording. There are, like, I do a lot of work in the Middle East, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia particularly, and for us, for the earliest parts, before the time of Islam, we have no written document, or very few written documents, but there is an extraordinarily rich oral poetry tradition which exists, and they have consecutive stories telling sessions that go on, which talk of your art, which talk of your culture, which talk of your humanity, it talks of where you came from, what your fears were, what you were looking at. So when you look at all of these, what is it that Take sort of brings out which allows us to be able to expand the art narrative? Is it just focusing on one kind of art? Do you also delve into performing art? I mean, most of the art formats which are now currently seen are not necessarily in the two-dimensional format that you can produce in a magazine. So do you have a whole lot of that material that also comes out in the magazine, or is it mostly restricted to the visual arts as we speak about?
It is restricted. Because my limitation as a publisher and editor is my practice and my education is from contemporary art. I mean, from the visual art, right? I've done my AFA and MFA, so it is limiting. So which is why I had to educate myself when we were doing this issue. We have, by way of guest editors, expanded into various things like photography, or various genres, because obviously even saying that I mean, like visual art is my forte, but not necessarily everything, which is why right from the beginning, from our first issue, which was Black, which was done by Shaheen Merali, we've invited people like, scholars like yourself and academics and hopefully Ashokji, we have to do our abstraction issue very soon. It was planned 10 years ago when I launched it. So so we've brought in mediums or ideas, so I've never wanted to make it medium specific like print issue and this issue and painting issue and make like, I thought that was very redundant and boring, and that, which is why, like I said, black, black could be anything. It's black humor, it's strain, it's color, it's so much more. So which is why that set the tone. And that, I don't know if some of you are familiar with how we launched it. We all launched it with the issue 0, which was a blank issue. Which was just an issue which had 100 blank pages, and people were invited to give me ideas, and that's how I started 12 years ago, and now we are in our 12th year and 27th issue. So so performing arts, not so much. Other subjects like like biennales, festivals around the arts, yes. But we hope to do more. We did not really want to. We got into fashion and design with Mayank's issues. So, which was not necessarily the visual arts, so which were, I thought they were amazing. They've become reference points for a lot of fashion and textile people. I think we can do much more, and we feel we don't have much of a presence online. So, a lot of this performing and theatre and all of that. Although, having said that, the writing award that we give, together with Pro Helvetia, is for writers in all of these fields, So we've had people applying from theatre, from performing arts. So critical thinking and critical writing, I don't think should be limited. But as a magazine, we've tried to keep some kind of a focus to region and writers. Does that answer me?
Yes, absolutely.
And I just want to go back to Dayanita. You brought in two things.
I know, I was also
Yeah.
Where's the second book? We didn't see the second one.
The second is Soumya Sankar's Let's Sing an Old Song, a book he made about Jatra artists.
Oh, lovely.
Like that. So he's put the gutter through the image, which, even though I do that a lot, I find very annoying in this case. But I like the whole ritual of this box. Then there's another pamphlet that falls out here, which becomes like a flip book. So I feel, can it be, to go back to what Mala said, can it be a traditional book with the content that one hopes for in a book, but also in a form that might require its physicality? Like, this has to be a physical book.
No, it's like your accordion books also.
I don't want to talk about myself.
But we should have one of the books here, no?
I don't.
Well,
so, I've got these two.
It's just that in the market currently, the proliferation of new formats of books are so exciting that people find it a very encouraging way to look at it. But as an archivist and somebody who works with older formats, let me tell you that most of these existed in the past as well. They existed, say, in the 12th, 13th, 14th century. You had palm leaf manuscripts in the most extraordinary formats. You had accordion-style books. Which had paintings and text together. All of these older
Japanese
manuscripts,
boxes.
most of the older manuscripts were in some form or the other.
Beautiful.
Books of a certain kind. Of course, till print technologies came, they were hand copied and moved on. If you look at things in Africa, if you look at things in other parts of the world, you see a whole proliferation of books of several kinds. It's only the printed regular format that all of us take for granted now, which is what we see as the book. But the book in its older format most definitely did exist as an art book in some form or the other. So the premise of art books is for sure relevant to all of us, and that is something that we continue to. But the point is, can we push and create books which actually add to the corpus of knowledge that we have, add to the kind of information we need to see about, talk and reflect, what is it that we are having, what is it that's happening all around us, is that being captured? If somebody looks at it 2050, if there is a 2050 to look back on Earth, will they be able to see something of 2022 in that? And so that was probably the prompting of the question that we wanted to have a discussion around. If there are people in the audience who would like to ask a question, we are more than happy. I see one hand there.
We invite some people actually as part of the discussion. We have Guftagoo should mention. Also, Parthiv is here, who's been designing.
Who's been looking at books for a while, yes.
And
that's a very
Bhavna is
important.
here, and Premji.
Writers are here, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy for people to want to come in. You may have a question like Ashok ji said, or you may have a comment. As long as everybody's brief, I'm quite happy to.
Very heavy. Very heavy.
All right. Who's starting?
माइक लाइए किसने
पहले अच्छा
Break the silence. Well, a general definition of art, which I wrote in 1960 while seeing the exhibits of Swedish Laureate in All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society Hall. One line comment I gave: anything unintelligible to a layman is called an art. You all are, first class artists, have your own era, time. So, secondly, John Milton, now the question is books. Milton says a good book is the lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed and treasured life beyond life. So, I think it is a universal truth, everybody can agree. And the question is, regarding the best-selling books, I don't name myself, though one of the books sold 3 million copies. Even currently it is selling 3 million copies. But one question is, which is put by Hippocrates, the word is the first Greek physician. He says in Latin, maxim, ars longa and vita brevis, means art is long and life is short. Do you agree to this maxim? Anyone panelist? What the panelist?
Mala.
No. Why Mala?
Yeah, Mala, give it to us.
What's the question?
The question is, do you agree
Art
Arta
and
longa
art-
vita brevis?
Art and life.
Life is short.
No, I really can't answer that. All I can say is art is life, life is art. It's what you call art. It could be food, it could be a sari you're wearing, it could be someone's face you're looking at, and that is there as long as you're breathing.
Anybody else for a question? A clear question? A short question?
Sorry.
Sure, please. There's one. I'm sorry, she's been waiting for a while. We'll come back to you, Parthiv.
Hi, Pramod.
Yeah.
Thank you for the discussion today, to you, Mala, Dr. Vajpayee, Bhavna, Dayanita, and Akshay. My question actually starts off from where you left off, and I'm directing my question to you, Pramod, because you edited this magazine, the last issue. I'm actually curious as to when you put this issue together and you had to make a selection of a certain number of books, and you said you did that, and there were certain books you would have liked to include, but you didn't, and you wanted the issue to be cohesive, and that is why, even though there were books that you would have liked to cover, you didn't. And then you ended by saying that if someone were to look at 2022 in 2050, what would they see? That's my question to you. When you put this issue together, what were the trends? What trends came up in terms of not only just the book, the content, but also book design, publishing, the entire publishing ecosystem or the art book ecosystem? I would be very interested to know,
Sure.
what are those new trends?
So, when the book was when the magazine issue was being put together, we definitely knew that we wanted to put out things that people would look back and say, okay, this was what was happening in the year 2022, for sure. But the other premise that I really held myself to was that, do I want to include things that are already well known and available in the popular domain that people can look at? There are extraordinary books being brought out all the time. Many of them are very well known, people get to see them, they're out there. But I chose to bring out issues, books of various sizes, formats, scales, design, technologies, which I felt were important but had not really been given their time of day in the Indian publishing market, in the way they are put out and seen. Also, when you speak about design, one of the premises we were constantly looking at was that, are these books designed in a way that they're accessible for the person to look at? And when the funniest part is I struggled the most in finding a book on design. I couldn't find a book on design. And eventually I agreed and I happily put up the one by Godrej where they did a book on the Godrej typewriter and how it was designed. So instead of being a book on design, I focused on a book which spoke of an obsolete technology which had gone out but beautifully illustrated its story. So design was really the one book type that we couldn't speak about because to my mind, while I see beautiful books which have several kinds of context coming, design was not something that was speaking to me at the same time. Now, I also preface this by saying that this is my filter. There will be others who would have varying opinions.
Yes.
So, I'm hoping that there will be a series of formats and places where everybody can put out what are the kinds of books you like. And if somebody in 2050 is going to look back, he or she should not only be looking at one Pramod KG's outlook, but perhaps 25 other ways of looking at it. And for all you know, there may be a beautiful ebook that we've not even considered because I haven't seen it. So there is no fixed answer to what you would want to know. But yes, the introduction definitely explains the scope of how these books got to be chosen and why they are there in the issue. Thank you.
But the simple answer is an editor, it's a magazine, this is not a book. So it's only reflecting his judgment.
And that's why I was asking.
There was a question at Parthiv then, yeah.
No, yeah, it's a comment. Hi. As a designer, when I wear that hat, I feel, because you spoke about design, a lot of my work is designing the art book. And thanks to Malvika, I designed the J. Swaminathan book, the issue for India Magazine. And for Ashok ji, I did whole series. So I've done so many books. So when both of you were discussing, Akshay and, Malvika and Dayanita, about the kind of book, the form of book, designer in me wants to do books like Kuftagu and the other book you showed. But practical reasons and the way it should function and the economy, because somebody said 8,000 rupees. I think I've designed a book which I have photographed and written on Narmada, which is published by Pratham, which is sold for 50 rupees, and it's been done in 10 different languages. So I have to come down. If I say that you can't afford me, my design or my art, which is photography, then Pratham can't afford me. So I think that I'm bringing that boy back in this room. So what I'm saying is that, of course, the art book matters. There's no denial in that. It's just that how do we try and make it more available to a lot more people. That's all I would say right now. And there is a dichotomy there. I mean, there is a problem there, but one will have to find a way.
There was somebody.
Yes.
This is a question for Bhavna.
Could you remove the mask?
We can't hear you.
Better.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Not really. Hold the mic to your mouth.
Okay.
mic
So this is a
inside the
question
mask.
for Bhavna. Since we're discussing design, display, and art, and the dichotomy of it, as you mentioned, what is your take on the coffee table book?
Coffee table books.
Where do you place the coffee table book in this discussion?
I wish we could banish that word.
We keep them on the coffee table.
No, but there's no such thing as a coffee table.
So
There's
that's
no such thing as a coffee
there is
table,
no
yeah.
such term as a coffee table book.
This
It
is
is a popular moniker given by people who don't necessarily have another word for a book of art or a book with
can't
illustrations,
read.
with text, with a lot of things put together. It's like why Bollywood gets very upset when you call it Bollywood and you don't say the Indian film industry. It's the same way. Coffee table is not a word that we encourage to use when we speak about books.
But there's no such thing.
No, I think the
No,
interior
it is
designer.
interior. I was just going to say that. I had this discussion with, and
and?
she said, nowadays I sell book by the inches. I said, oh, it was the kilos earlier. Yeah, no, I'm quoting her right here. And I was like, I'm going to quote you there. And she said, yes, because interior designers come in and say we
Good
need
God.
some coffee table books. The client's cupboard is this size, it's this scale, it's this width.
And it needs to fit in
Please,
that.
it
yeah.
needs to fill in.
Fill in that, yeah.
And she said, she said, I cringe, but I'm happy to cut that bill and be like, okay, sold. Yeah, for whatever reason. The same way we gallerists discuss art sometimes behind the table, behind the sofa, behind all of that, this color, that color, and we cringe and we say, we don't keep this kind of art at all, please. Sorry, yeah. So it is, and when this went up, I don't remember who, but somebody said, oh, what are these being used for these days? These art books? Will there be a vase on top, or are they keeping the bonsai, or?
I must say, I use some of those books to put my
Yeah.
Laptop.
Laptop.
So that question is very relevant, and it should be brought up, because I was just like, oh my god, wow, but it's true, right? Everywhere you see these two books, the person doesn't know what the books are
No,
about,
it's a
but
term.
he has them on
It
their
is
table.
colloquially used. It's popularly used. A few of us might find it derogatory. I again go back to Bollywood. Actors don't like it when their industry is
No, but
called
the same
Bollywood,
thing
but it
becomes
exists.
the coffee
Okay,
table
I know
book.
you don't want
so
me
it's
to
not a
intervene.
separate
No, no, no.
category of book. It's the same
I
book.
need to intervene.
But
for
we
one
need to
minute.
get on to another
Yeah, but
question.
I-
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll come back
No,
to
but
that.
he should intervene.
Please.
He
He's
wants
not
me to
spent enough
intervene.
time.
You don't. I know that. Because you think I'm going off the track, and I will go off the track, because that's what it's all about. I think that somewhere the kind of books that are not accessible, the very expensive books that a lot of us can't afford to buy, in the old days, those were the ones that were crafted like in a box. They had beautiful things that closed them. You had texts that were in containers that was studded, for instance, in Bhutan with turquoise and coral and all that. So that was done at a patronage level. People patronized it. The Raja or whoever he was gave money without any questions asked. And then there was the other book. And I think somewhere that happened in textiles. The skills lived because people who wanted the fine textile paid for it. The skill lives today. But it may be done in a cruder way in terms of its quality, but that doesn't mean it's not being accessed by people. So I think that somewhere these divisions need to be made, and that's why the kind of books that she's doing are the ones that people need to patronize, the ones that Parthiv would design, and just do what you want. Somebody has to put their money down where their mouth is. And I think what has happened in India recently over the last 40 years is the patron has died. People are not willing to put money down for that which is of that quality. It's always the quick economic turnover, sale. That should happen too, but there should be patronage.
So I think we're all in agreement that we need different kinds of books in publication. But yeah, let's go.
There are two things that we actually haven't mentioned, and those are extensions. We haven't mentioned the library, because in the modern world, it's the library that the ordinary person is able to connect with.
Correct.
And as you know, I would like to state something. I have a lot of books, and many of them are what you call coffee table books because I've written them. But I can tell you, all those books have been collected and will go to Jamia because the police destroyed their library. And I hope that the art department will get some of my best books to keep, including 19th century and 18th century works. So now that is one aspect. The other aspect that I would like to raise here is that I was very happy that you spoke of the Indian Constitution. In fact, one of the finest works in my collection is by Byohar Ram Manohar Sinha, who painted a lot of those works.
Yes, yeah.
And it is something that is so personal, and then you realize that these things come down along the library, they come down with the book collection, they come down to actual works you bought. And these works are very personal. Now what he made for me, when somebody in my family dies, we go to Jabalpur, to those rocks, and leave the ashes there. He made an exquisite Chinese classical painting of that Ahalya Bai's island. We go there and leave our ashes there. And he made it specially for me, and I still have it. It's there in my drawing room. It lets me know the time has come, you can leave. And the second thing I would like to point out is that when you start with the library and you move to books, you eventually move to collection.
Correct, very true.
I have Vivan Sundaram's Death of Indira Gandhi. I have Ram Kinkar's Jatra and a number of other works. And don't think that this is only something that you're doing like sort of somebody is just doing something. I know that medicine is so expensive today, so when I got ill, I was able to sell my works. I bought a Zarina Hashmi for 3,000 when it first came, and I got 4 lakhs for it. So let me tell you that this is a linkage from the library to books, to collection, and finally to sales, because when you're leaving you can sell these things.
One more thing.
Sure. Come.
To sell something which
Yeah, hi, Sulaina here from Art Alive. We just brought out this book, 20th Century Indian Art, that has documented the journey of Indian art since 1937 till now. But I want to talk about something else that Suniti just mentioned. It doesn't only lead to collection, it also leads to knowing more about artist life. I remember when I met Raza Saab many years back, and in Mumbai, Ashokji was there. And I took the book that I did on Thota Vaikuntham. That was our first book in 2003. And at that time when we were doing that, I went to Vaikuntham. I'll speak about that first. And I went to him and I said, I want to do a book on you. He said, on me? What do I have to give you? Why would you do a book on me? You take works from me and sell it. I said, no, but your works are so popular, and he was still popular then. And I said, I want to do a book on you. And he said, I've got nothing. I said, you do nothing. We'll come. Just let us enter your home. We'll find material. And the book that we did on him actually put him on the map as an artist who had, at that time when Telangana was a dot in Andhra, he put Telangana on the map, and we went to his village. We did the whole research. We went and met his teachers. We went and met people, all the women that he was to do. When I drove with him to the village, I could actually see those colors, those dark bodies, those bejeweled bodies, and we all understood after that book came out where his Telangana women were coming from. One, that. Secondly, when we were doing Raza's book, now at this point, if somebody has to look at Raza Saab's studio in Paris, which is no longer there, it's only in that book. That is the only book that has that you can actually see the place where he used to work, his canvas, his table, his malas and everything. And I and Ashokji have spent many, many years. I think we must have done about 10 or 15, I don't know how many trips to Paris. And I still remember on one of the trips, I asked Razaji that, he would start talking to him, he would go and chat with him. He said, I used to design books. So I said, really? And Ashokji also, we did not know at that point that he used to design books. So he said, I have designed 3 books because I didn't have money, and I went to one of the publishers and I designed books. I said, where are they? I don't know, they must be somewhere here. I still remember we got onto the stool and we kept looking into his books, where are they, where are they? We brought out those 2 books. And you can see the cover design of those books only in that book, Life and Art of Raza. So as Suniji is saying, that so many people today who want to know about Raza, how would they know? How would the coming generation know who these artists were, what their practices were, what kind of life they led? So I think books do matter.
There was someone?
Premji Share, and then there's somebody there. I think she came first, and then Premji Share. Then we'll come back. How much time do we have?
This is a question for Dayanita, ma'am. Ma'am, since you primarily work with the book as a medium, and you revolutionize how the book is exhibited as well, what is the book do for you for the work? Because, and does that change once it's disseminated, you know, into the world, once it goes out into the world? Does the book as a medium change the nature of the work through the various interpretations that people have and they share with you? How has that worked? I mean,
So, great question. You've sort of hit at the heart of my work. For me, art is about dissemination. I'm not interested in making beautiful silver prints and hanging them in a little gallery or a big gallery or even a museum. I want my work to be out there, and that possibly comes from my training in photojournalism. You know, where you did a cover for Illustrated Weekly and you knew that 200,000 people were going to read that story on Tilak Vihar. You go to the best gallery in India and you're lucky if you get more than 300 people passing through. So the art world for me was always a very awkward place. Book was the only place where I could really disseminate my work, and I could be away from the commercial constraints of the art world up to an extent. And then, of course, I realized that when I make a book, and if I make a book object or an exhibition, and I put it directly into your home, for one, I'm creating my archive of my work in your house, but I'm inviting you to be the curator of my work. So I'm not only disseminating my work to you, I'm co-opting you into my work. You may or may not even realize it. And that has been the true privilege of my work, being able to take my artwork into your house, because the life it has in your house, no museum can compare with it. So it's truly a privilege to make a book that is my work in your house. Thank you for that question.
Last one.
Premjish, yeah, this is the last question.
Thank you. No, it's been a fascinating discussion. For one reason, which is the most important reason, I think, was that there is no consensus about what the book is, what the book should become, and what the book has been. And it has been able to also foreground the various antagonisms that exist in each of your mind based on your social standing, ideological positions, personal desires about the book too. And it has been very important that way. One thing which struck me during the discussion is, I think, the question which was raised to Bhavna was about the various issues you address, which is also part of the expanded notion or the expanded practices which are part of the way contemporary art is elasticizing itself. Everything is now contemporary art. In taking that into account, and the question is this, that could the book contain this elasticity? Malvika ji talked about like when Akshay commenced his observations, you brought in image. But is image text? The binary is here. But where do we find space for embodied experiences, sound, smell? Can the book contain all these things into it? Of course, books textualize things. In the classical Greek way, books are ekphatic. They may be able to describe it. And here is what we have to also realize, the limitation of the book. And this is what I would like to say, that okay, it's fantastic to have a utopic imagination about the book, but we should not bite more than what we can chew, or not kind of put book in that position. But the question is, could book contain these expanded ways in which art is evolving?
It does.
It does,
Yeah.
but a lot of it is tangible, right? It is like smell and this thing.
But everything is not complete, yeah. That's the whole joy of living. It's infinite.
Exhibitions as opposed to, I mean, like when you say
Publication.
book is an entire exhibition, then that question is probably for Dayanita. Where, I mean, like, you know, what is the comparison to what? Like a book is a complete of what? I mean, you're saying, is that, I mean,
No,
if
no,
not an exhibition,
no, is
like,
it- are you trying to say
you just said that I got more viewership with the book than with the
Art.
exhibition.
With the exhibition.
Debatable.
Not at all.
No, not at all,
Not at
not at
all.
all.
It's in your house, you're looking at it all
Absolutely.
the time.
No, I'm talking about her exhibition.
Yes.
The exhibition
Satram Das-
visited by
No.
Satram Das jeweler
Hmm.
sent a letter put in Park Street 2008, taken out in 2018.
But it's an exhibitionist mode.
Yeah,
It's exhibited.
yeah. But I want to actually address what Premjish is saying. And he's absolutely right. The way art is growing and the kind of new media that is becoming part of art, that is quite impossible to, that will have another kind of book. The concept of book will be there, but the form will keep changing, which is what I started with, that the form will have to keep changing. Of course, we all want the book, and new media will have to find its own form for the book. But the idea of the book is central to what we're talking about. But, you know, I think ebooks are very limited in the way that they're made.
And the change, Dayanita's change has gone back to some of the older ways of doing books.
Yeah. Sorry, there was one last question somewhere, right? There was somebody in the back? Or are we done? Oh, great, super. Ashokji, I need you to thank and sort of do the
Well,
formalities.
I want to tell you an episode where a book created an art style. This relates to the Persian translation of Valmiki Ramayana commissioned by Emperor Akbar. And this was a royal commission. In those days, the manuscripts had to be illustrated. So, artists from Kashmir, from Rajasthan, from Gwalior, etc., were brought to the Mughal Darbar, and they all came with their own individual styles. Finally, they settled together a common style, and that is the style which later came to be known as the Mughal style of painting. It was born out of the need to illustrate the Persian translation of Valmiki Ramayana. This is an episode which I am not narrating to you by a fluke. There is an article of Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh which says this and analyzes it. Incidentally, Rahim, whose tomb is nearby, was not satisfied with the Persian translation that Akbar had commissioned. So he commissioned another translation. Finally, Ramayana of Valmiki has 33 translations in Persian. Anyway, that's a different story. So here was a book which gave birth to a new style or school of painting. Now with that, we come to the end of this evening. I thank all the panelists. We had very interesting discussions. Perhaps they were not all that focused, which is not the point. The point is to have a good conversation, not so much focusing. The focusing is boring, and you keep on having these focuses all along. And in this heat, you had come all the way, so we are very grateful to the audience, and we will let you know about our next. In the meanwhile, do look intelligently and sensitively at some of the art books that are around, even in your home, lying on the coffee table. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. I told you not to ask me.
I'm glad you asked you.
No, because I'm not one for these kind of things. Of course, your conversation. But
Thank
What do you
you
mean
so
you're not
much.
for that? Of course you're not for it.
I said,
Society
I
is
told
not
you
one
why
for
you
it.
shouldn't have asked me, because I don't fit into very intellectual debate.
Of course you do, you fit into it.
Thank you.
You know, आपको भी present you with the flowers.
We should be.
Yes, it's a very important point.